Smart professionals, good salaries, yet still living paycheck to paycheck. Where does all the money actually go every month? The answer isn't what most people think. Most people assume that living paycheck to paycheck only happens when someone earns too little. But what if that's not actually the problem? What if the real reason many smart professionals stay financially stuck has very little to do with their intelligence, education, or even their salary? Because across the United States and Europe, thousands of engineers, teachers, designers, nurses, and analysts are quietly experiencing the same thing. They earn decent money, and yet somehow there's never much left at the end of the month. Not because they're irresponsible, not because they're bad with money, but because they're operating inside a financial structure that slowly absorbs almost everything they earn. Let's look at a very ordinary example. Imagine someone in their early 30s living in a mid-sized American or European city. They work a stable professional job and earn about $75,000 a year. On paper, that sounds comfortable, but after taxes, healthcare, and social contributions, their take-home income might be around $4,500 per month. Now let's watch where that money quietly goes. Rent or mortgage, $1,800. Car payment and insurance, $600. Student loan payments, $350. Utilities, phone, and internet, $300. Groceries, $500. Subscriptions, streaming, and apps, $80. Credit card payments, $250. Gas and transportation, $200. Occasional dinners, small lifestyle spending, $300. That already brings the monthly total to roughly $4,380, which means from a $4,500 take-home salary, only about $120 remains. And that's before unexpected expenses, a medical bill, a car repair, a flight home for the holidays. Suddenly, the credit card balance grows again and the cycle continues. From the outside, this person looks financially stable, but internally, they're living in a constant state of financial pressure. And here's the strange part. Most of these expenses didn't happen because of reckless decisions. They happened through small, logical steps. A slightly nicer apartment because commuting felt exhausting. A reliable car because public transport was inconsistent. A few subscriptions because everything runs on subscriptions now. A credit card because emergencies happen. Each choice made sense individually, but together they created a financial structure where almost every dollar is already assigned before the month even begins. This is one of the least talked about problems in modern personal finance. Income grows, but lifestyle infrastructure grows with it. Not luxury, infrastructure. Housing, transportation, insurance, payments, services. Once these fixed costs expand, they become extremely difficult to reverse. Moving apartments is stressful. Selling a car feels like a downgrade. Canceling certain conveniences feels like losing progress. So people adapt psychologically. Instead of reducing expenses, they normalize the pressure. And over time, the paycheck-to-paycheck lifestyle begins to feel normal, even for highly educated professionals. There's also a psychological factor at play. Humans naturally compare themselves to their immediate environment. A young professional doesn't compare their life to billionaires. They compare themselves to coworkers, friends, or neighbors. If everyone around them has a similar apartment, similar car, similar lifestyle, it feels reasonable. But there's a hidden mathematical problem inside this comparison. Most people in the same social group are making very similar financial decisions, which means they're often stuck in very similar financial situations. The system quietly reinforces itself. Now let's stretch this example further. If that same professional saves only $120 per month, that's about $1,440 a year. After 10 years, ignoring investment returns, that's roughly $14,400. For someone earning $75,000 a year, that's surprisingly small. But if just $600 per month had remained available for saving and investing instead, the 10-year total becomes $72,000 before growth. Same salary, completely different financial future. The difference isn't intelligence, it's structural awareness. Financially intelligent people eventually notice something subtle. They stop viewing income as the main variable. Instead, they focus on the structure of their fixed expenses. Because once those structures lock into place, freedom becomes mathematically difficult. They understand that financial comfort doesn't come from earning more alone. It comes from creating space between income and obligation. And that space is usually created early, quietly, and deliberately. Not through extreme frugality, not through hustle culture, but through a different way of thinking about lifestyle upgrades. Instead of asking, "Can I afford this monthly payment?" they ask a slower question. What will this payment do to my financial flexibility 5 years from now? It's a calm, almost boring way of thinking, but over long periods of time, it creates a very different outcome. Because money problems in modern professional life rarely come from dramatic mistakes. They usually come from small, comfortable decisions that quietly stack together, until one day a person earning a good salary realizes they're still waiting for the next paycheck to arrive. Not because they failed, but because no one ever explained how the system actually works. If this way of thinking about money is interesting to you, consider subscribing to the channel. Because sometimes the most useful financial insights aren't about making more money.
It's not just about expenses, it's about time. When professionals live paycheck to paycheck, even with a decent salary, something important quietly disappears: their ability to make calm, long-term decisions. Every financial choice becomes short-term, not because they want it that way, but because the system forces it. Think about a typical moment. A talented employee is offered an interesting job opportunity in another city. The work is more meaningful. The long-term growth is better, but the salary is slightly lower for the first year. For someone with strong savings, this is simply a strategic decision, but for someone living paycheck to paycheck, it becomes impossible. Rent is due next month, car payments are fixed, loans still need to be paid, so the safer choice wins. The person stays where they are. This happens thousands of times every day across the United States and Europe. People with potential quietly choosing stability over opportunity, not because they lack ambition, but because their financial structure leaves no room for risk. This is one of the biggest hidden costs of living paycheck to paycheck. It doesn't just affect savings, it affects freedom of decision. And over a long enough timeline, that freedom becomes extremely valuable. Now consider another common situation. A professional in their mid-30s begins to feel burnt out. They've worked hard for a decade. They've built skills, experience, and a reputation, but mentally they need a break. Maybe a few months off. Maybe time to learn something new. Maybe time to start a small project. But financially, the math doesn't allow it. Even 3 months without income could collapse the entire structure. Rent continues, loans continue, insurance continues. So the person keeps working, even when their energy is fading. This creates another quiet psychological pressure. When people feel financially trapped, they start chasing income increases as the only solution. A raise, a promotion, a higher paying company. And sometimes that works, but often something strange happens. Income rises, and within 1 or 2 years, expenses rise with it. A better apartment, a newer car, more lifestyle comfort. Again, none of these choices are unreasonable. They simply reflect the natural human desire for progress. But the financial gap between income and obligations often remains almost the same. This is why some professionals earning $60,000, $90,000, or even $120,000 still feel financial pressure. The numbers grow, but the structure remains unchanged. And when that happens, financial stress slowly becomes part of everyday life. What financially aware people eventually realize is something very simple. Financial security isn't about maximizing lifestyle, it's about protecting flexibility. Flexibility to change jobs, flexibility to take breaks, flexibility to say no to things that don't align with your life anymore. This flexibility doesn't appear suddenly at retirement. It builds slowly through small structural decisions made years earlier. Things like keeping fixed costs slightly lower than what income technically allows, resisting the pressure to immediately upgrade every part of life after a raise,
allowing savings to quietly grow before expanding lifestyle. From the outside, these decisions often look unremarkable, sometimes even conservative, but over 10 or 15 years, they produce something powerful: time, choice, calmness, and perhaps the most important thing of all, financial breathing room. Because once someone has that breathing room, money stops controlling every decision. Instead, it becomes a tool, not for luxury, but for stability and independence. And interestingly, the professionals who understand this rarely talk about it loudly. Their lifestyle may look similar to everyone else's, but their financial structure underneath is very different. Fewer obligations, more reserves, more patience, which means that when unexpected events happen, and they always do, their lives bend instead of breaking. So the next time you hear someone say that living paycheck to paycheck is only a problem for low incomes, it's worth remembering something. Many smart professionals are in the exact same position, not because they lack discipline, but because the modern financial system quietly encourages spending structures that absorb nearly everything people earn. Understanding that system is the first step towards thinking differently about money, not emotionally, not dramatically, just a little more consciously. If you enjoy calm, reality-based discussions about money and financial behavior, you can subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the most valuable financial insight isn't about earning more.
And it has less to do with math and more to do with how modern life is designed. Most financial decisions today don't feel like big decisions. They feel small. A monthly payment here, a subscription there, an upgrade that adds just $80 more per month. Individually, these numbers don't look dangerous. In fact, they often look harmless. But the human brain is not very good at evaluating monthly commitments over long periods of time. For example, imagine a professional decides to upgrade their lifestyle slightly after getting a raise. They move into a nicer apartment that costs $400 more per month. They upgrade their car payment by another $250 per month, and they add a few services and conveniences that together cost $100 per month. Nothing extreme, just a normal step up in comfort. The total increase is $750 per month. At first glance, that seems manageable, but over a year, that number becomes $9,000. Over 10 years, it becomes $90,000. And that's before considering what that money could have become if it had been invested or saved. This is where the real financial difference between people quietly appears. Not in dramatic financial decisions, but in how often lifestyle expands after income increases. Most professionals are never taught to think about money this way. School teaches algebra, history, science, but almost no one explains the mechanics of long-term financial behavior. So people follow the most visible model available to them: upgrade life gradually as income grows. Again, this doesn't come from irresponsibility. It comes from social expectation. If someone works hard for years and receives a raise, the natural assumption is that life should improve immediately. And in many ways, that makes sense. But financially aware individuals think about improvement a little differently. Instead of asking, "Can I improve my lifestyle right now?" they quietly ask another question: should my lifestyle grow at the same speed as my income? For many people who eventually build financial stability, the answer is no. Their lifestyle grows, but slightly slower than their income. That small difference creates a gap, and that gap becomes the foundation of financial stability. At first, the gap is small, maybe a few $100s per month. It doesn't feel life-changing, but something important begins to happen. Savings start to accumulate. Investments begin to grow. Unexpected expenses become less stressful. Over time, the person no longer needs to depend completely on the next paycheck.
That's the moment when the financial pressure slowly begins to fade. Not because income exploded, but because the structure changed. And when that happens, something interesting occurs psychologically. Money stops feeling like a constant source of tension. Instead, it becomes quieter in the background of life. Decisions become calmer. Work becomes less desperate. Even career choices become more thoughtful because the person finally has what many professionals never realize they're missing: financial margin. Margin is simply the space between what you earn and what you must spend. Without margin, even a high salary can feel fragile. With margin, even a moderate salary can feel stable. That's why two professionals earning the same income can experience completely different financial lives. One constantly waiting for the next paycheck, the other slowly building long-term security. The difference is rarely intelligence, and it's rarely luck. Most of the time, it's simply awareness. Awareness of how small financial structures quietly shape the next 10 or 20 years of life. Once someone begins to see those structures clearly, their decisions start to change naturally. Not through strict rules, not through extreme budgeting, but through a calmer understanding of what actually creates long-term financial stability. And in many ways, that awareness is more valuable than any short-term financial trick. Because once you understand the system, you begin to move through it more deliberately. If you enjoy thoughtful discussions about money, psychology, and long-term financial thinking, you can subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the most important financial ideas aren't the loudest ones.